Whoa! Congratulations on your
3 strikes. Sit down.
Okay.
Sit down before a war.
Nope.
I thought you died.
Sorry.
We have 5 days to do this, and we're going to need all of them. Alicia, come on now. This is going to be for posterity. That means 10 years from now, it's going to be, Alicia, come on now. So you'll be in your 30s, you'll be like, all right, in the folder.
Is it going now?
Yeah, it's going now. We're going to go into notes, and we're going to go to French Revolution Part 1. That looks like this, French Revolution Part 1.
Like it literally won't move.
It literally says that. All right. So the way that this plays out is literally like a play. I told you that before the break, that we were going to have different acts and different scenes, and we're going to do Act 1 today.
I'm so excited.
All right. It's been a long time coming, and that's the part where you guys, a lot of this is just going to be a little bit of review. But why have we been on a collision course for this thing to happen?
Because there's a lot of financial upset in France.
Right. Okay. And that's eventually where we're going to get. This is, I mean, you could trace it back to everything that we knew about Louis XIV, his tax system, the frivolous spending, the Versailles, the unnecessary wars, the fact that he wanted all the political power, and that the people that would have given him enough money to maintain financial stability wanted to share that power, but he didn't want to share it. All right, so we've been on this for a long time. The compromise that Louis XIV made in order to have complete and utter power over France was they would get their traditional rights to tax exemption. And then it eventually kind of piggybacked on a bunch of other things too. All right, so this is basically what we're going to kind of outline today, is that thesis. Every different social class is going to bring the French Revolution forward a different layer. All right, and the nobles are the ones that initiate this, but the revolution that they wanted to have was a glorious revolution. They wanted to have England's revolution in 1688, where the people that had already had a lot of privilege but did not have political power merely wanted the revolution to begin and end there. All right? The king, the nobility, or the king and the parliament, or whatever you want to call it, the king and the estates general, was literally going to be like one move. We have no political power. We want political power. The king has no money. Now the king can appropriate taxes, but the nobles were going to have a say in how those taxes were spent. That's it. I mean, that's basically where they wanted it to end. And it was insane for them to think that that was going to be the end of it. All right, it's not 1688. It's 1789 by the time we finally get to this. That's another 100 years. We know that an agricultural revolution has happened. We know that a population explosion has happened. We know that enclosure acts have happened. We know that there's a move towards manufacturing because of the agricultural revolution. We know that even though France did not initiate that, we know that France was at least starting to move people to the cities and was starting to have at least a semblance of a working class. And that's going to add a different dynamic to this. We also know that France had an Enlightenment, where the ideas that were centered around that Enlightenment were, why do aristocrats get privileges that nobody else does? What about the natural rights of all people? All right, and where do we get to see that? And where are there distinctions based on birth? Just because you have a "duh" in your name means that you get some type of benefit that nobody else gets. How you doing? All right, we're kind of in the middle of it. I don't know if, does that mean we get sound or not?
Yes.
All right, so let's just start and end with that today. How's that? Like, you can leave that and then we can use that for tomorrow?
Okay.
Or are you ready to go?
Yeah, this just plugs right in.
Oh, sweet. All right, go ahead.
Alright.
Pause. This is a lot of fun. High-tech stuff.
Wait, what is this for?
YouTube.
This is for the YouTube.
My name is
It
So
records
that
it
next,
also.
so that next year these are available.
Anush
Kumar.
Class of 2020.
Class of 20.
Siddharth was here.
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Do it this way here.
No, absolutely not.
Alright.
Do I have to do anything after I'm done, other than just turn it off? Perfect.
Sweet.
Love it. All right, thanks. Okay, if you look in the notes here, you see a list of names. You don't have to know them. All right, what they symbolize is that there was a ton of finance ministers in France. And the majority of these finance ministers are in the period leading up to the French Revolution. It's almost like you're hiring and firing college football coaches because they can't seem to win. So you bring in the new guy goes 3-9, you fire him, bring in the new guy, he goes 3-9. But these are not bad football coaches. Well, they're not football coaches, they're finance ministers, and they weren't even bad finance ministers. It's just that the advice that they had to dispense to the French monarchs was not the advice that they were looking for. What's the advice?
Magic solution.
You have to tax the nobles. Like, the reason why we are bankrupt or we are in dire financial straits is because your tax system is screwed up. The only way that you're going to repair it is by taxing the population. You can't just tax a small segment of the population, and you definitely need to tax the people that have the ability to pay those taxes. All right? So the peasantry, you're not going to be able to shake a lot of money out of the peasants. They've given all they can give. All right? So whether it's John Law, remember René de Maupeou I told you about. He was the one that finally said, tax the nobility, we'll deal with the fallout. And that was when we were looking at the enlightened despots, and Louis XV was one of those guys that was like, I don't know why the aristocrats get a privilege that nobody else gets. But when they started to tax the nobility, and remember they created that judicial body called the Parliament of Paris that said, you can't tax us without us consenting to those taxes. And he's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fill the Parliament of Paris full of people that will appropriate the taxes. And that way you guys will be rendered obsolete. And it played out fine. But after Louis XV passed on, and Louis XVI came in, and Louis XVI, I told you, just wanted to be liked. And he recognized that the nobles were mad. He said, why are you mad? It's because you taxed us without our consent. He's like, I won't do that anymore. Do you guys like me? He's like, yeah, we'll like you. All right, here I hereby declare you tax exempt. It doesn't solve the problem. All right, because you still have this financial crisis, right? They cannot balance their books, all right? They have spent way too much money. They're on the verge of collapse. Something's got to give. And that's what they kept telling him. So after Maupeou, it was Turgot. Then it was Necker. Then it was Charles Alexandre de Calonne. Then it was Etienne Charles Lomini de Brienne. And they're all coming to him and they said, got to tax the nobles. He's like, bad advice, you're fired. Next guy comes in, got to tax the nobles. I agree with the previous guy. Do you know why the previous guy was fired? Because he said I had to tax the nobles. Give me some different advice. A guy will walk in, he's like, sell public offices? It's like 15th century, dig it. But not a long-term solution. Oh, you want a long-term solution? Got to tax the nobles. You're fired. And away we go. Until eventually we hit crisis point. And the crisis point is 1786, 7, 8, 9, when the French are bankrupt. And now the king is like, we're probably going to have to tax the nobles. And somebody's like, no kidding. I've been saying this for 30 years. You're going to have to tax the nobles. And eventually that's where we get to the end of the tax situation. Right? But before we get there, if you just look at the notes, it says, all of the finance ministers saw the need to tax the other estates. The last three were dismissed. It was an appeasement to the nobility by not taxing them. But it's not really an appeasement because it's not solving the problem. Okay? Why are they in the situation they're in? All right, that's all of the things that we mentioned. Here's their tax system. The old nobles are tax exempt. Remember when we called the nobility of the sword, that was the old school nobles? Then we had the new nobles that were called the nobles of the robe. They're tax exempt. They weren't tax exempt, then they got administrative positions, and then they became nobles, and then they became tax exempt. So you took more people off of the vote or off of the tax scrolls. The clergy, always been tax exempt. the majority of the middle class. Remember, the middle class are paying taxes, but you chased a bunch of them out because of religious intolerance. Remember the whole revocation of the Edict of Nantes and all that stuff? The suppression of the Jansenists and all that. That was chasing people out that could have contributed to the tax base. So what's left? The sans-culottes. Haven't talked about them yet, but they're going to be really important in the French Revolution. All right? The sans-culottes are the urban workers. Sans-culotte means without breeches. That means the knee breeches, you know, the ones where kind of like the stockings that the aristocrats used to wear. So that's what they're referring to. Okay? The urban workers pay taxes. The peasants pay taxes. The remainder of the middle class pay taxes. They are paying out the teeth. All right? It's not going to get it done. Okay? This is the cat chasing the tail thing that I was talking about. The king has all the power, but no money. The nobles have all the money, but no power. And neither one is willing to relent to the other. Okay? Why are they broke? I literally just listed all of the stuff that they were engaged in. The War of Devolution, the Dutch War, the War of the League of Augsburg, the War of Spanish Succession. Those are 4 Louis XIV wars. Followed by King George's War, 1740 to 48. Followed by the War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 48. Involved in 2 wars in 2 different places at the same time. Followed by the 7 Years' War, followed by the French and Indian War. Another set of 2 wars at the same time. Then they decided they would bankroll the American Revolution. Okay? Not cheap. Successful? Sure. But not really, because it bankrupted France. Okay? The spending of Louis XIV and XV. All right? The money that's spent on Versailles. The money that's spent on mistresses. The money that's spent on mistresses' estates. All right? Bad financial decisions. There was one called the Mississippi Bubble Crisis, which was like a stock venture where they said, hey, invest all this money in this overseas venture. And then it turns out that you spent so much money on investment that it inflated the stock price and then the bubble burst. And then people ended up losing their shirts. Okay? And you have the screwed up tax system. So all of that is contributing to the fact that by the time we get into the 1780s, we've hit a place of no return. Something's got to give. And now Louis, who's kind of like, we should tax them. Let's not tax them. We should tax them. There's like 2 Louis. Like one voice is like progressive Louis that says, we're going to have some changes here. They're probably going to be sweeping. Let's roll with it. And I'll be like the liberal progressive king. And then there's one voice that's Louis like, you know, screw that. You're a Louis. Divine right. You know, you don't listen to people. God tells you what to do. And he's kind of listening to both of those voices. One will tell him to proceed with things. The other will be like, back off and fight those things. All right. And eventually we get to a place where at least Louis is now, all right, we're going to have to make a move here. So he calls this group called the Assembly of Notables. This is in 1787. This is right after like all the the bills came due for the American Revolution, and a bunch of nobles and clergymen sat down with him. It's almost like a like a sit down. He's like, "What do you think if I tax you guys?" And they're looking at each other like, "Yeah, we're probably not thinking too favorably about that, Lou." Lou's like, "Yeah, but we're bankrupt." He's like, "Yeah, you are, but you have all the political power and we have none of it. So if you want these taxes, you're going to have to call this representative body called the Estates General." And Louis like, "What the hell is the Estates General?" He's like, "That's our parliament, dude. That parliament hasn't met since 1614. Okay? Remember how bent out of shape the English parliament got when Charles I dismissed them between 1629 and 1640? And they came back and they're like, like John Pym and the short parliament. We want, Buckingham dead, and we want all these. I mean, they were like on gangbusters. These guys, they're not going to be gangbusters because they don't even know what the hell the Estates General is. But they do know that for 50 some odd years, they've had no political voice. And they desperately want it back. All right? And they said, "We got you. You need us. You need our money. You know this is coming. You just have to say yes." And he didn't initially say yes. It took 2 more years. But eventually they said, if you want the taxes appropriated, you're going to have to call the Estates General. And that kind of is the termination point of the taxes section. The nobles were the ones leading this charge. Okay? It's something that they've wanted really since the days that they lost their power, which is right on the tail end of the, like the War of the Three Henries and the religious wars. Okay? We've gotten back to that point. I told you before that the way that they're visualizing this is we will get a glorious revolution. The nobles, maybe some high-ranking like merchants or whatever, they're going to have a whole bunch of political power and they're going to share that power with the king and there will be the peace. So they meet for the first time since 1684 or 1614. All right? The Convention of the Estates General is the termination of the taxes issue. Okay, we've got there. The king knows something's going to come. All right, so he's like, everybody come to Versailles. We're going to have a convention of the Estates General. Each of the estates will bring their representatives. The clergy will get 300 representatives. The nobility will get 300 representatives. The third estate will get 600 representatives. And you all can bring your list of grievances, and I'll listen to those grievances, and we'll make some changes. That's the good Louis talking, right? And he's sitting down, he's going to say, all right, so here they come, right? So who's there? Those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. Those are the 3 estates, okay? Remember that the fact that they're even talking about estates already bends people out of shape, okay? What the hell is an estate? That sounds like the feudal age. And there's a lot of people that were like down with the Enlightenment that were like, we got to be done with the feudal age. All right? The first estate is the clergy, those who pray. All right? And the people that are there are predominantly like upper clergy. These are like the real dudes, like the archbishops and the bishops and those types. They're the ones that own a lot of property. They're the ones that have a lot of rank and a lot of privilege. And then some of them are like lower ranking clergy. They could be like parish priests. But for the most part, it's not going to be, because parish priests have jobs. Like they actually have to do what they're doing and like tend to the needs of, the people in their parish. All right? So for the most part, it's the people that can travel. All right? Out of a population of 25 million people, 170,000 of them are identified as clergy. That's not much. That's what, 2-3% or something like that. It's not much. All right. So what does their list of grievances look like? Because they all bring this thing called the Cahier de Doléances, the list of grievances.
006.
It's going to be like a leaflet, or like a post-it. It's like, what do you want? What list of grievances? They're like, well, we don't have political power. We don't feel like the church matters as much as it used to. So maybe it can matter more. Maybe we can have more of a voice. Maybe like some of the lower ranking clergy might get a raise. Something. But it's going to be very, very minute what they really want. Okay, they kind of side with the nobility on this one. All right. The next estate, made up of the nobles, is another 300 representatives, and the nobles make up 400,000 out of 25 million. So now you're up to 570,000 out of a population of 25 million. They're the ones that have all of the privileges. They're the property owners. They're the dues in some cases. Some of them are lower ranking nobility that don't really have a lot of power to yield or wield. But the high-ranking nobles, the ones that are, coming from very, historic regions, they want what they used to have, which was they used to matter a lot more politically. Okay? They want to protect their privileges. They want to protect their money. All right? If they're going to have to pay taxes, they want to make sure that they're the ones that have a say in how it's appropriated. They want the sovereign or the Estates General to matter. They want it to meet occasionally, and they want to serve as a check against the arbitrary power of the king. So their list is, like a sheet, like a piece of copy paper. Like, here you go. This is our list of grievances. They're like 5. Okay? Clergy got to post it. You know, then the other estate shows up. And this is the middle class, the sans-culottes, and the peasants. Okay? Now, how many sans-culottes are going to kick off of work so they can go hang out at Versailles? If they are working. And if they aren't, maybe they're there. But it's not going to be a really big part of that contingency, you know. Mostly the representatives of the Third Estate are really just going to be representatives of the bourgeoisie. All right, the peasants, I don't see the peasants like kicking off from, you know, their day's labor and all of their obligations to come hang out at Versailles either. All right, but they do have at least issues. All right, and they're huge. I mean, they're varietal. I mean, they're the middle class have got their issues that are going to be kind of like Locke and Montesquieu, and they want liberty, and they want, you know, they probably are not really speaking out quite yet about the aristocrats and all of their privileges, but they want to, you know, have a place at the table. You know, they want middle class things, laissez-faire economics, free trade, some things like that, property ownership being protected. But the sans-culottes, they probably want jobs and a variety of other more economic-oriented things. There's a lot of arbitrary taxes that are paid by the lower classes. Taxes on salt, labor obligations, you know, a variety of different things. What they call manorial monopolies. Like the peasants, like some nobleman would own the cider press, and that if they wanted to use it, they would have to pay a toll. Or if they wanted to, you know, have access to the woods to hunt, they'd have to pay a tax. It's just a bunch of just like holdovers from the feudal age. And they're just like, this isn't fair. Nobody else pays these taxes except us. So when you're looking at the Third Estate's list of grievances, it's not a post-it. It's not a piece of copy paper. It's like Santa's shopping list, you know? It's like a scroll that just keeps going. You know, and now the king is kind of like agitated a little bit because he's like, man, if we have to do all the stuff they want to do, I mean, this is going to get really ugly. Fortunately, the clergy and the nobility kind of like huddle in the corner. And they're like, all right, well, we've presented our list of grievances to the king. The king will take them under advisement. Now we should vote based on the grievances and what the king is willing to appropriate. And we have decided that because we are people of rules, we will go by the 1614 rules, which means each estate gets a vote.
A vote.
A vote. We will vote according to order. So the clergy get a vote, the nobility get a vote, and then everybody else gets a vote. Okay? And that's the next issue. And the ones that have a real issue with it are the bourgeoisie, but there's probably others too. And they're kind of looking and saying, you know, what's up? Why are the clergy and the nobility huddling into a corner? And why is the king like, yeah, let's vote according to order. 1614, rule-based people, that sounds great. Why are you guys insisting? We got 1,200 representatives here. Every one of them has a voice. Every one of them matters. You know, why are you guys like so dead set on voting according to rules that existed 170 years ago? And they're like, well, we're just people of rules. They're like, no, you're not. You're people of privilege. And you're trying to protect those privileges. And you realize that if this revolution becomes a bourgeois revolution, that bourgeois revolution might find some of y'all obsolete. So it sounds to me like maybe this revolution isn't really a revolution. It's just a minor adjustment to what already exists in the feudal era. And the bourgeoisie says, no, that's not how this is going to go. And they have a voice now in the form of, you guys remember Common Sense from the American Revolution? Kind of was like the document that Thomas Paine was like, this doesn't seem right, it doesn't fit. That this little England gets to control this mass of territory, and then these people get no political voice in what's being done to them. That doesn't seem like it jibes. Well, that's what Abbe Joseph Emmanuel Sieyès is doing. And his tract is called, What is the Third Estate? Question mark. What's the answer? His answer is the Third Estate is everything. Okay? They are, what, 224.4 million out of 25 million. They do all the work. They pay all of the taxes. And they get what, 1 out of 3 votes? Nah, I don't think so. And that's what they said. And they're like, no, that's not what we're gonna do. We are not voting by estate. All right? And they were pretty steadfast in this. And after Abbe Joseph and Manuel Sieyès writes this, they're like, this is the Enlightenment. This is just logic. This is rationality. This says that the people ought to have the vote. All right? And so the way this ends up playing out on the next phase, this voting issue takes them to the culminating event of that voting issue, which is called the tennis court oath. Is anybody familiar with this? What is it, Katie? You nodded.
I'm familiar with that. I don't know exactly.
Okay. All right, so they made this move, all right? The Third Estate, and then actually a couple of, some of the members of the clergy, and then the woke members of the nobility that said, what they're saying makes sense. They are the majority. Why aren't we voting as one body? And so they said, let's meet tomorrow. And what we've decided is we're chucking out this Estates General nonsense. We are voting as a National Assembly. All right, we're not using this language anymore. Estates General is archaic. It is a vestige of the feudal system. It's like straight out of the Enlightenment. We need to throw off the vestiges of the old way, the old order, l'ancien régime, as it was called, which doesn't sound French enough. L'ancien régime. And they said, we are the National Assembly. All right, and we are done. We're going to meet tomorrow here in this room in Versailles. See y'all at 8 a.m. And they show up the next morning and it's like, room is closed for painting or something. It's locked. They're locked out of their meeting hall. Maybe that was a deliberate move. Maybe it was Louis who was like messing around with his head again, trying to figure out what was going on. All right. So they found this abandoned tennis court and they said, all right, everybody huddle in here. And this is what the oath is. They say, we refuse to disband until we have given France a constitution. That's the oath. All right. This is the painting. Very famous painting. Okay? The painter of the revolution, his name is Jacques-Louis David. And he paints some highlights of the French Revolution, Napoleon era. But this one's called the Tennis Court Oath. And if you look in the foreground here, you can see a member of the clergy, a member of the nobility, and a member of the Third Estate. And they're kind of huddled in the center to indicate unity. All right? They've made their choice. And they said, we refuse to disband until we've given France a constitution. They're taking on the language of a unified body called a National Assembly. All right? Now they're going to hammer out the details on a constitution. And now we just need to say, King, what do you think? All right, and we got, where's the king? Oh, king's up here, okay? So let's go to the map. All right. Here's the king, here's the tennis court, National Assembly. This is in June, late June, all right, that they made this declaration. The king is at first, because he vacillates, that's what he does. He's like, let's do this. Let's not do this. Let's do this. Let's not do this. The first voice says, they have spoken. He tells the other members of the nobility and the clergy that were like holdouts. He says, they've made their choice. You guys have got to sit with them now. All right? And then Bad Louis starts speaking to him. And maybe it's Marie Antoinette, because it's like his wife. And she's a Habsburg, and she's not like used to all this transformative politics stuff. She's like, when are you going to be a man? You're a Bourbon. You're a Louis. King Louis would have never gone for this. Why are you? Why are you chumping out? All right? You need to tell them who's boss. You're a divine right king. God tells kings what to do, not tennis court people. All right? Disband those fools. So he orders this National Guard to go disband the tennis court. Okay? Scene 3. Bread. Okay? So here's up in Versailles. Remember, Versailles is an isolated place outside of Paris. It was like 30 miles or something outside of Paris. Okay? We know that. All right, the king is isolated, and that's part of the problem. He doesn't really understand what the pulse of the people is. He doesn't know what poverty looks like. He doesn't know what starvation looks like. He knows that bread riots are a nuisance. Okay? He knows that poor people don't pay their bills. All right? But he doesn't really understand what's going on with the folks here. All right? And the folks are taken to the streets because they're starving. Bread prices have gone up like 400% in those couple of years. All right? They are going through a crisis. All right? Bread riots are the result. Okay? And the next group that really carries the revolution, and this is really the agency of the revolution, is the sans-culottes. These are urban workers. It's a huddled group, okay? Peasants are rural. They're isolated. They're in pockets. But concentrated unrest is something that you have to worry about. And the urban workers are now confronting the fact that bread prices have quadrupled. What does that mean for the manufacturing sector?
Lower production.
Why?
Because your workers are starving.
Not only that, but the workers are also confronting the fact that if agricultural prices have quadrupled, that means that people are paying 4 times as much for their bread, means they're not buying a lot of manufactured products. What happens to the manufacturing force? They lose their jobs. So now they're jobless and they're starving. All right, and they're taking to the streets because, look, they get pushed around enough, but eventually they hit breaking points. All right, and that's happening a lot more as France has been dealing with this, like the fallout of Louis XIV. Okay? Because they're always bearing the brunt of whatever the financial burdens are, and the government's not stepping up for them here. Bread prices can't quadruple. All right? There's no way. That's like the one thing that you got to keep bread prices low. All right? Otherwise, the people are going to take to the streets, and that's what's happening here. Okay? Now remember, things have kind of, over the course of time, this is not uncommon. All right, bread riots in Paris is not an uncommon occurrence. It's happening more and more. But typically what happens is the king orders the troops to break up the bread riots. Okay, maybe there's some pacification. Maybe, there is a reduction of prices, or maybe it just kind of works itself out over time. But this is what they're used to. They take to the streets, the government beats them down. A couple more months later, a couple of years later, they take to the streets, government beats them down. They hear that the National Guard is on the move. They don't think the National Guard is going to some isolated tennis court because that's not in their world. They're not thinking about that. All right? They're not oath-taking. They're not thinking about bourgeois things. They're thinking about feeding their families. All right? And they're like, oh, yeah, so the National Guard's going to come and beat on some poor people again. Great. And then finally, enough of them said, not this time. No. Okay? They heard that there's this abandoned prison, okay? Or the symbol, all right, called the Bastille. The Bastille is a prison, but it's a debtor's prison, okay? It's where you send poor people when they can't pay their bills. All right? Or people that are begging that are resulting to criminality because they're starving. Okay? Jean Valjean kind of stuff, right? All right? So this Bastille represents everything for them that they hate about the state of affairs in France. Okay? Social inequality, economic inequality, the prison. They're like, you're basically being incarcerated for being poor. Sound familiar? All right? And finally they said enough is enough. And they hear that Bastille there's an armory that is part of the Bastille that might have weapons. And they're like, if the government is going to order these troops in to beat on us poor people again, we're fighting back this time. So storm the Bastille, get a hold of those weapons, let those poor people out of jail, because they're not in jail for any other reason other than being poor. Okay? And the crowds are agitated. All right, and a paranoia is developed that says we're going to get beaten down by these troops. So they storm the Bastille. And that's the moment. That is the epic moment in the French Revolution. July 14th, 1789. That's their moment. All right, the people take to the streets. And then once people take to the streets, there's like an energy. then more people will take to the streets. And then the crowd just kind of get frenzied. All right, and does violence happen? Hell yeah, it happens. Okay, there's some Swiss guards that are out here. Some like, what do you call it, guys? Like Barnacle Boy, like from SpongeBob.
Yeah.
The elderly kind of like superheroes. So you have some like elderly, like guarding the prison. There's nobody really in the prison. I think there's like 7 people in the prison. So they freed like 7 people. How many arms did they find? How many guns? 0.
Oh.
All right? But it doesn't matter because it's still cool. They were able to kill the Swiss guards. They were able to kill the prison governor. They were able to kill the mayor. They put their heads on pikes. They could run them around the streets. They could shout a few Viva Revolutions. All right, now it's got an energy. Okay? King finds out about it. What's the king going to do now? These folks that were supposed to be going to the National Assembly to break that up, now got to deal with the uprising in Paris. Okay? But who are these National Guard? There's a lot of misinterpretation about what's going on here. Okay? Misinterpretation from these people about what these people were intending to do. Misinterpretation about what the king had ordered these guys to do. And misinterpretation about what would happen if the National Guard storms Paris. Do they really see these guys as the enemy anymore? Okay? Some of these guys are veterans from the American Revolution that watched people that were like dying for their liberty. Okay? They might see these guys as people that are dying for their liberty or dying for their survival. They might, have empathy for them. And that's what exactly happened. He orders the troops to go into Paris to disband this bread riot again, and this time the troops end up merging with the crowd and say, you guys are our brothers. We're not going to kill you this time. All right, we got new energy. We think about things differently now. So now the bread issue has led to the storming of the Bastille. The last thing to happen then is the peasants need to get involved. And the energy that is created in the streets of Paris now fans out into the countryside. It's called the Great Fear. Because all the problems that the urban workers had, the peasants got bread problems too. They got a lot of problems. They got debts, because of, the state of financial affairs. They've got all these labor obligations that they hate. They have all these excess taxes that they hate, So they're going to let their legs do the walking. That's what's cool about this, all right? The sans-culottes and the peasants, they're not writing down documents. They're cahiers de doléances are with their feet. They're with their act. All right, they're taking to the streets. They're making the revolution happen. All right, they're not revolutionaries on paper. All right, they're revolutionaries on pavement. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
So the sans-culottes.
Sans-culottes.
Yeah. So the people who storm the Bastille, so they're essentially low middle class people, essentially like blue collar workers.
Blue collar workers. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so here's the deal now. You've got chaos everywhere, all right? The people are taking to the streets, the people are taking to the countryside, and now, really, the king's kind of lost control of things here. Who's going to try to reel it in?
The nobility.
The National Assembly, which is made up of moderates, bourgeois, but they're going to try to come up with something that's going to stop this momentum. And the thing that they come up with is really one of the most lasting things that happens in the French Revolution. And we'll get to that tomorrow, but it's called the Night of August the 4th. And basically at that point, they got rid of feudalism. All right, one night, August the 4th, they got rid of feudalism. We're going to look at the document to see what took place, and then we're going to start getting into these different acts. Okay, tomorrow we're going to really look at what's called the bourgeois phase of the revolution. And that's where the middle class has kind of hijacked the revolution, and they want to create a termination point for it that would respect what bourgeois people would want. But then the peasants and the sans-culottes and others are going to be like, where's our revolution? And that's where we start to get into some generational differences, and we start to recognize that there are people that are not satisfied. and that they didn't want to have a glorious revolution, and now they're basically saying we don't want to have an American revolution either. We would want to go further. All right, and that's where it starts to get a little bit further out of hand. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay, let's just real quick.